Welcome to News Inside. I'm your host, An Jung-hyun. Let us start by meeting our panelists. We are joined by Professor Shin Sang-hyuk. Thank you very much for coming back, Professor.
Thank you.
And we also have Professor Lee Young-eum with us. Thanks for joining us again. First, here's a look at this week's 60-second news update.
The Ministry of Health and Welfare has promoted the chief of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to the vice minister level. The revised bill was passed at a cabinet meeting and will take effect from January 1st, 2016. The revision aims to strengthen the role of the agency to effectively control future infectious diseases such as MERS. Since entering the Mexican market for the first time in July, Kia Motors has managed to exceed its sales by selling over 2,000 cars last month. Kia Motors is aiming to join the top 10 players in the Mexican auto market and is planning to increase its number of dealerships. The local manufacturing plant is currently under construction and will begin operations from May next year. With this new development underway, local sales are expected to increase in the future. As chair of the UN Human Rights Council for 2016, South Korea will be responsible for overseeing the UN's Universal Periodic Review of human rights situations in all UN member states. Korea is now expected to play a dynamic and leading role, raising its international status higher than ever.
Korea will be the chair country for the UN Human Rights Council in 2016, and human rights, as we know, is one of the key priorities of the United Nations. What kind of human rights issues can we find around the world today?
Well, I think it's better for us to think about what human rights are. Well, human rights are rights inherent to all human beings, regardless of race, gender, nationality, languages, or religions. And these days there are many cases of human rights violations, but among the many cases, I want to talk about two cases of human rights abuses. The first one is the North Korean case. And as you know very well, North Korea has been very notorious as the state they violate human rights. Well, according to a report made by a commission of inquiry established by the United Nations Human Rights the Council in 2014, North Korean government has committed the systematic human rights the abuses at a scale without parallel around the world. I mean, in the contemporary era. And if I tell the human rights violations committed by the North Korea are extermination, murder, enslavement, rape, torture, so many are the criminal acts made by North Korean the government. And the other one is regarding the refugee issues. In the world, Syrian refugee crisis is emerging as one of our top issues. And in Europe, very recently, there was a meeting discussed about proposal for a mandatory distribution of the asylum seeker, but they failed. And also this proposal included the other steps to protect asylum seekers in Europe, but the European countries failed to make a consensus on this proposal, which means that there are many high possibilities of the human rights abuses in Europe. Mm-hmm. Well, I think these two cases are representative cases of the human rights abuses in the world.
In fact, the North Korean human rights situation is being discussed more and more now at the international level, isn't it?
Yes, I think it is very fortunate that the condition in North Korea regarding human rights violations is being discussed globally, because just raising the issue in South Korea alone cannot actually bring about changes, and only global recognition will be able to be instrumental in bringing that about. But in order to get a more comprehensive understanding of what human rights is, I think we need to go back to the basic principle, or the Declaration of Human Rights. In 1948, UN adopted a Declaration of Human Rights, which had 30 articles. but which can be basically divided into civil and political rights and social, cultural, and economic rights. And so civil and political rights would include such rights as right to life or equality before the law, things that Professor Shin mentioned, and also freedom of expression. And the social, cultural, and economic rights would include things such as right to work. And so, yes, I mean, when we talk about human rights, we tend to think about the more atrocious examples, and of course we should, but the issue of human rights is a very wide-ranging issue.
Mm-hmm. This is actually the first time that Korea was elected to lead an international organization dealing with human rights. Could you tell us how this election came to be?
Well, the Human Rights Council is an intergovernmental body in the United Nations system, and then it has 47 United Nations member states. They are elected by the General Assembly. And in fact, this council replaced the former UN Commission on Human Rights. And as you are explained, for the first time, the Korea take the became a chair country of the Human Rights Council. Actually, this is the 10th place for in the history of UN. The Human Rights Council. Well, in fact, they have some allocation, regional allocation. Well, in the Asia, region, there were 5 member states. Well, actually, the chairpersonship is given by turns, and this is the turn for the Asian countries. And actually, there were competition for the presidency between Saudi Arabia and Korea, but Korea was elected finally because, in terms of the maturity of the human rights, the Korea is far advanced than the Saudi Arabia. So the member countries very easily decide to choose Korea as the chair country in the year 2016. Well, the Korea will take the chairpersonship of this council for 1 year. And I think this is very meaningful because that the chair will take the very influential, give huge influences over the general activities of the Human Rights Council. So I think it's very meaningful.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about Ambassador Choi Kyung-lim, who is going to be the president of the UN Human Rights Council starting January 1st, 2016. He has a lot of responsibilities to bear. Who is he? I understand, Professor Shin, that you
Yes, actually, my specialty is trade. And then he is a professional diplomat. And when he was in the Foreign Service, as far as I know, he dealt with many the projects or programs regarding the promotion of the international trade. Actually, he was one of the negotiators for the FTA negotiations with the many countries. But right now, at the moment, he is the Korean ambassador to Switzerland. And then he became the president of the United Nations Human Rights Council. He will serve this position for 1 year in 2016. I think he is the man of the action. I think after he was elected at the first interview with journal, mass media, he said that he wants to improve the function of the council as the actor, not the policy maker. So I think he will be able to contribute to realize the decisions made by the United Nations or the Human Rights Councils their decisions as a series of the actions to improve the human rights maturity around the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, as you said, he's a career diplomat and a seasoned negotiator, so hopefully his previous experiences will help him in his new post. What will be his major responsibilities, though?
Yes, basically they have 3 meetings a year. One lasting 3 to 4 weeks, and so the president will have to preside over that. There are various subcommittees that the Human Rights Council oversees. Some of the important ones are the Universal Periodic Review, which reviews the human rights status of all UN member states, and also something called the Special Procedures, which looks at a variety of issues dealing with human rights themes sometimes, and countries that have human rights issues. And so themes can be extreme ones, as the torture or selling of children, or it can be relatively or basic or mild, such as the freedom of religion or freedom for peaceful assembly. And so it covers a wide range of issues. And of course, with regard to countries, and that's one of the committees of the special procedures was involved in the evaluation of the North Korean human rights violation.
So the main function, main role, contribution of the United Nations Human Rights Councils are: the first one is strengthen the promotion and protection of human rights around the world. And secondly, this council addresses the situations of human rights violations, and also they make some recommendations on them. So I think these are the roles and contributions the United Nations Human Rights Council are making right now at the moment.
Korea has come a long way to become a country that can play a leading role in international organizations. What can we expect from Korea's newfound influence in the global community?
Well, actually Korea has been leading not just the Human Rights Council, but other committees in UN, such as Economy and Social Affairs Committee, or the ECOSOC, and other forums as well. The Cyberspace Forum back in 2013, Korea chaired the ITU in 2014. So the status of Korea as one of the leading international countries has been recognized, that's for sure. But I think with that comes more responsibilities. So being the chair of the Human Rights Council means that I guess Korea has to take special care not to let the allegations of human rights violations voice themselves in Korea, not in terms of making the voices quiet, but making the conditions so that discontent does not occur.
We've discussed the significance of Korea's chairmanship of the UN Human Rights Council and also touched upon its future role. Let's now turn our attention to a domestic issue. The National Assembly's Health and Welfare Committee has passed a bill for death with dignity. The so-called well-dying law will allow terminally ill patients to stop receiving life-sustaining treatment. Let's discuss this issue further with our panelists. So after a long and heated debate, the bill is finally headed for a vote at a plenary session. What is included in this so-called well-dying law?
Yes, this law included 4 very important things in it. The first one is, actually hospice care was only for the cancer patient. But according to this law, actually the terminally ill patients, all terminally ill patients could get the hospice care and treatment. This is the first change made by this law.
State-insured hospice care.
Yes. And second one is, in fact, owing to this law, in fact, the hospice care and treatment could be more actively provided. Well, these days, as you know very well, the Koreans have still, do not get enough hospice care. Well, I have very interesting data. According to a report made by the Economist Intelligence Unit, well, Korea was placed at the 18th place, best place in the world to die among 80 studied countries. Well, how we could get placed at the 18th place? Well, in terms of the human resources and treatment services, Korea is one of the best countries in the world. But the palliative care and treatment, well, Korea ranked at the lowest places among 80 studied countries.
You're speaking of the quality of death.
Yes, yes. So in fact, the only 5.6% of people received palliative care in Korea in the final stage of their life, while in Australia they got 63.6%. So this data shows how terminally ill patients in Korea could get not enough care in their final stage of life. So what I'm saying is, the hospice, the care and treatment could be more actively provided to more people owing to this act. Third one is, in fact, the doctors could make a decision to stop this life-sustaining treatment. They could get the legal the basis to make such a kind of a decision. Lastly, first one is also the follow-up actions could be taken after the doctor decide to stop provide the life-sustaining treatment to the patients, which means that as a whole the palliative care service could be more actively provided to terminally ill patients in Korea owing to this act.
Mm-hmm. Yes, when we say terminally ill and when we say right to die, there are several issues that are involved. First of all, the definition of right to die with dignity involves several aspects. Is it active? Is it passive? Are you withholding care, or are you actively administering some kind of an injection? And that is one of the most controversial ones. And then at what stages in the development of the disease are you going to get the care or get the right to die with dignity? So are you going to let people decide for themselves as soon as they are diagnosed? Or are you going to wait until almost the very end? The other thing is, what if a person has not been able to express their intent to die with dignity, but unexpectedly falls into a coma? So voluntary versus non-voluntary. This is different from involuntary, which is which means against the wishes of the patient. As non-voluntary is the patient is not able to speak for themselves. And so this bill, if you kind of categorize it, you could divide it into a trend, a path for better end-of-life care, the palliative care, which does not do anything to make the disease better, but to help the person cope with the pain, prepare for death. And so that is what was really lacking in Korea, and that is what this bill has provided. And the second category is the right to die, or how you can die. And they said that the primary doctor and another expert physician can make the decision. And if at least two of the family members say that the patient had the intent while the person was in a sort of a sound mind state, or if the person had intentionally signed a document, then that would be possible. If in the case of non-voluntary, if the person falls unexpectedly into a coma, for example, you would need the consent of all the family members. Mm-hmm. And so they have taken measures to ensure that no unwanted right to die case occurs.
Well, in fact, you don't even have to be a terminally ill patient to sign an advance directive saying, if this ever happens to you, you want your life to be to go this way or that way, right?
That's not an easy question to answer.
But I mean, there is a way for individuals to actually make that decision, and I think this law, if anything, enabled a discussion in society about people's right to die with dignity. I mean, death with dignity has always been a very divisive issue with strong arguments from both proponents and opponents. I'd like to hear your personal thoughts on this issue.
Personally, I am against life-sustaining treatment for terminally ill patients. Well, there could be several reasons, but I want to consider realistic reasons for the life-sustaining treatments. for terminally ill patients, because average lifespan of people increased dramatically in Korean society. Many people maybe finalize their life without any problems, without any diseases. Then maybe there will be more cases of the situations, requiring the decision whether they will continue provide life-sustaining treatment for the patient or not. But personally, I think we have to consider the dignity of the other family members. Of course, according to the persons who are for this service, they said that we have to respect the dignity of the patient. But the other side of the coin, there are some human rights or the dignity of the other families. Well,
that's
so
a realistic
one,
reason,
yes.
right? So you are in support of this law.
Yeah.
What about you, Professor Lee?
Well, the way it is formed, I'm basically in support of it, and I think there is general consensus in Korea in support of the bill because of the two very controversial cases, previous cases, one back in 1997, where family members of a terminally ill patient, because it was costing too much money and there was no hope for recovery, they asked for the life-sustaining treatment to be suspended. And the person died, and the physician was prosecuted and found guilty. But then, about 10 years later, back in 2009, the family members, before actually asking the physician, they asked the court to grant them the right to terminate the life-sustaining treatment for their family member. And the Supreme Court of Korea granted the family the wish. And those two cases were cases where the people were not conscious. They were, on the verge of death, but their life was just being sustained. So, in those cases, yes. But as you said, there are parents who don't want themselves to be a burden to their children, and sometimes even commit suicide. But then, if we have laws like this enabling that, and if this law extends the boundaries to include those cases, is that ethical? And there are cases where comatose patients have recovered. Mm-hmm. So, if I'm in a coma, I don't want any sort of additional support to breathe, for internal fluids. It is a very controversial issue. And so, yes, I am in general support for this bill, but within a very limited boundary.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the law has really come the farthest so far. Before, passive euthanasia was considered almost a taboo subject, but now there are active discussions about it. The law still has one more hurdle to overcome, though, the National Assembly's approval. What do you think needs to be done in order to reach a full consensus?
Well, I think there is a lot of things to be done to improve the hospice and palliative care. What I mean is that, to make the consensus about this act, the government should improve the quality of hospice and palliative care services. Let me give you some not very interesting, but important data. As of today, there are 60 hospices with 1,009 beds in Korea. Of course, the Korean government emphasized that they will increase the number of beds up to 2,500 this year. But like this, in fact, the Korean government should make every effort to improve the quality of hospice and palliative care services in order to make the more consensus about this act from the people. Otherwise, there will be more discussion, pros and cons about this act. And considering the experiences in the other advanced countries, I think this is one of the most important issues the Korean government should commit itself to improve, I think.
Well, religious beliefs play a big part in whether one is for or against the issue of death with dignity. Obviously, politicians are still facing opposition from the religious circles regarding this bill. Is there enough of a social consensus, do you think, that the politicians will be able to push through with the bill despite opposition from the religious sector?
Yes, especially in Christianity, they ban, they tell you that your life is God-given and you should not do anything artificial to stop it. And so there would be some opposition from some of the religious leaders, but the makers of this bill contend that they have discussed the issue with the religious leaders, many of the religious leaders, and so they have, I think there is general consensus. The liberal and the conservative media all seem to be in general support for the way this bill is formed in a very restrictive way.
Well, it has been 18 years since the debate on death with dignity, or passive euthanasia, began in Korea. Let us hope all arguments are fully examined and all concerns fully addressed before the law is enacted. Multi-channel networks, or MCN, are hailed as the next big thing in the media business. The government has stepped in to expand its support for MCNs and vowed to promote a Korean-style MCN industry. So let's discuss the prospects and plans for this new type of media content. With the rising popularity of individually created content on websites like YouTube and Africa TV, we've actually seen the emergence of professional companies managing and supporting these individual talents. Could you tell us what exactly MCN is and why it's garnering so much attention?
Yes, the MCN is an organization that works with the video platforms such as the YouTube to offer assistance in areas such as the funding, product programming, and the crossover, the promotion, and the partner management and sales and the audience development, many in areas. But they got some percentages of the advertisement revenues from the channel. But this is the MCN. Well, in fact, as I said before, the MCN's main revenue comes from the some portion of the advertisement revenue from the channel. So, in fact, comparing with the effectiveness of advertisement through the existing mass media channels and with these newer channel method, the effect in the advertisement, it is more strong and huge than the existing channels. So I think this is the main reasons why the people pay more attention to MCN.
So can we understand it as a sort of talent management agency for popular video makers online?
I mean, put simply, I think you can say that. MCN represents a general trend, we say in the media, academia, a move from the mass media world to the internet media world, where individuals are connected and their power comes from the connectedness of the individuals. So why is MCN so popular? Why has MCN become so popular? Because a lot of people started using it, and the advertisements on these video channels are being viewed by viewers or the users, and they are making money. MCNs initially did not start as these mass or big company ventures. One of the first successful MCN ventures, the Maker Studios, which was eventually bought by Disney last year, was started as sort of as a coalition of about 4 or 5 YouTubers who wanted a solid sort of network that they could help out, so that they could help each other out in terms of use of the facilities, getting people to their sites, and so on. So it started as sort of a cooperative, but then because of the popularity of some of the YouTube videos and because of the fact that actual sort of real money started to come in, these big companies started to notice the changes and they started to take interest. And so some of the big companies have been involved in this.
So the Korean government is now eager to create and foster Korea's own MCN industry. What exactly is the plan?
Well, there are several plans by the Korean government, but the most important ones would be to create an environment that would enable the YouTubers or the one-person media personnel to create better content, and secondly, to establish a mechanism for consolidating these ventures. But it's not, I mean, before the Korean government got interested, some large companies, large Korean companies like CJ, SK, KBS, and MBC, they all have started their own sort of efforts at an MCN venture. So it is not just, yes, I mean, I'm glad that the Korean government is taking interest and is trying to help these individual video producers, but this is a trend. I mean, Korea is a heavily, internet-heavy country, and it has one of the most number of users. It has the most. It has an increasing number of content creators. People have been. The infrastructure is good, and so there are many factors in Korea that are conducive to the development of MCNs.
Mm-hmm. When we analyze this phenomenon in an economics point of view, what happens when big companies, big money, starts to become interested in what was initially user-created, talent-based content?
Well, that's very interesting, a very important question, I think. You know, comparing with the creator's capacity, ability, as an individual or at the big company, definitely, in terms of volume, the big companies have more the resources. But in terms of the creativity, which is very important to attract the attention from the people, particularly from young generation people. As you know very well, most of the users of the internet or the YouTube, they are young people. So considering these characteristics in this aspect, in this situation, definitely when the big companies involved in this business, I doubt. I'm really concerned about maybe creativity, the quality of the content created by an individual personnel could be maybe eroded out. So I think the key question when you allow the involvement of the big companies into this business, I think how they could keep the creativity which in personnel could make will be the most important things, I think.
Yes, when we think of the mechanism that MCN works, it is individual creators. MCN wasn't started by big companies, but as these big companies started to take interest in the system, they have created this, I guess, a carnivalization aspect of the content creators. And so some of the big companies like Machinima have been criticized by the individual creators who were doing well by themselves, but then decided to get into the MCN for more, to be more wide recognition, better facilities, and so on. But then some say that they were sort of forced into a contract or a life-term contract. The rights of the content was taken over by these big companies. And so you see many people that are critical of the MCN system, but then many of the people also are very content to be in the MCN system. But we basically have to be careful of letting the content creators take the credit and the profit. So not to carnivalize, but to let them take a fair share of their creation. That's one thing that is needed. So in terms of creativity, the government participating in this endeavor, I think, in a way, I guess the government is taking an appropriate approach in that they are not trying to hire people to create content. They are trying to consolidate the creative efforts of the individuals in Korea. And so that is the direction that it needs to go in order to ensure that creativity endures.
Mm-hmm. When there is profit involved, there is going to be some unwanted side effects as well, such as sensationalism, because to generate profit, you have to record a certain number of views, and what sells better than sex and violence and things like that, right?
Right. The contents could maybe include more of the violent and the sexually suggestive content. So to make this industry be more prosperous in the future, we need some monitoring system, screening the quality contents of the system, as long as not to destroy the creativity of the content creator. But I think this is very important because, as I said before, the users of the internet and then those who connected to the YouTube, most of them are still the young generation people. So considering this aspect, definitely the content control, not to allow the too excessive, the violent or the sexually suggestive content should not be included, I think. That will be very important.
Well, one good thing about the fact that it started on YouTube is that YouTube does not allow for highly seductive content. They have a mechanism of filtering that out. So that is one of the sort of the positive aspects of it having started on YouTube. But because the content creators are very young, if you look at the content that is created, that's the sort of content that is not, that you cannot see on traditional television. There's this little girl that constantly tapes herself eating things from beginning to end. For hours sometimes. There is a person, one example that I thought was especially sort of helpful and very beneficial and also entertaining, and which represented the very good part of YouTube, was the case of a person called Michelle Phan, who shows you how to do makeup. And she transforms herself from a very common-looking girl to Angelina Jolie. She really looks like Angelina Jolie. And she details the process by which she does it. And she has made a tremendous amount of money because of the number of followers. And there are people who just talk about games, computer games. And so the content on YouTube, the famous content on YouTube, is not the kind of content that you see on regular TV. And so in that aspect, the MCN might be able to kind of steer the content away towards a more better produced,
diversified.
Diversified, and sometimes actually better produced content. And that is what Disney was trying to do with Maker Studios.
So is MCN here to stay? Will it be able to maintain its current growth and success?
Definitely.
I think so.
It is the age of the internet. We are moving into the age of the internet, and so this is actually one of the things that is heralding the coming age of the internet.
Professor?
Yes, I have same idea to Professor Lee, and actually money is not everything, but it's something. So particularly in the business, money is very important. I think considering the money which will be made from this business, certainly there will be more competition, but eventually more people want to use the multi-channel network, I think.
Well, let's hope that MCN will be able to maintain its momentum and grow into a leading industry in the new media market. That is all for this week's edition of News Inside. Thank you for joining us. We will see you again next week.